Aside from selling airsoft guns, one of the more popular services we offer is repairs for airsoft guns. And over the past few years of doing repairs, I've noticed a trend that there's been quite a few repairs that I've done for people that are things that probably could have been fixed at home had they known a few simple facts about airsoft guns. So I thought this week I'd give you a quick tutorial on troubleshooting for airsoft guns, specifically the M4, but you could probably apply the majority of this to just about any airsoft gun. Now, I don't care how much money you've got invested in your airsoft gun or even how well you treat it. Sooner or later, all airsoft guns are going to break down. Now, I pretty much categorized those breakdowns into a couple of different categories. The first of which we're going to talk about today is you pull the trigger and nothing happens at all. The first thing you're going to want to do is to open up the battery compartment on your gun and determine if you even have a battery in the gun. So first, make sure you got a battery. Number two, make sure the battery is connected to the gun. And number three, make sure that the battery is charged. Now, I know those three things might seem pretty simple, but that covers about 25% of the repairs that I get are people that bring in guns that have stone dead batteries that just won't hold a charge. So you may want to borrow a friend's battery, try that out in the gun and see if that makes a difference. If it still isn't doing anything, then go on to the next step. The next thing you're going to want to do is to make sure that the connector that runs from your battery to your gun is actually connected properly. So you do that by just tugging on it and make sure that the wires don't pull out of it. If you tug on it and the wires pull out of the connector, then you know that it does have a loose connection. What can happen a lot of the time is when you go to plug them in, it'll force the pin out of it and it won't make a solid connection to your gun and not allow the gun to work. So you can fix these. You'll notice there's little wings at the top of it. You can just take a razor blade and just bend those out, and then those will fit back into the connector and give you a solid connection. If your power connectors are damaged beyond repair, you can always come in and get a replacement wire set here. They go for around 10 bucks, and they basically give you all of the wires, the connectors, and the fuse holder and the fuse, which is basically everything to get your gun up and running again, and it just crimps onto the existing power connectors on your gun. If the power connector on your battery has gone bad, I pretty much recommend just chucking it and getting a new battery. For what it'll cost for us to fix it, it's probably cheaper just to go ahead and just get a new battery pack for your gun and just start fresh from there. So all the power connections are okay. The next thing you're going to want to do is check on the fuse for your airsoft gun. These are either located in a clear or a black fuse holder towards the end of the power cord. You just simply open them up like this and that gives you access to the fuse inside. Now, half the time when you look at it, you'll actually see a burn mark inside of the little glass window where the element has actually got a gap in it. So when you see that, obviously the fuse is bad and needs to be replaced. The other half of the time, it won't actually show that there's anything wrong with it. A lot of the time, just from vibration and use, the fuse will break inside of it where visibly it looks okay, but it's just not making the connection. So either way, just go ahead, replace the fuse, put a new one in there, go ahead and close it up and see what happens. If you pull the trigger and it works, then you've obviously fixed the problem. If you pull the trigger and nothing happens, then there's something else that's wrong with it, and we'll go on to the next step. The third option is you pull the trigger and something happens for a minute and then the fuse blows again. That pretty much means you got major problems going on inside of the gearbox, and I'd recommend bringing it in for somebody to actually service it at that point, where it'll probably be something outside of what you can do at home. So if you've replaced your fuse and still nothing's happening, the next thing you want to do is make sure that your motor is getting power. Easiest way to do that is go ahead and pull the cover off. There's two screws, one on the top and the bottom. You just pull those off, remove the cover plate. When you do that, it'll look something like this inside of the grip. There'll be two wires that run to your motor. Basically, what you want to do is pull it out a little bit so you can check on it and make sure that both of those connectors are connected to the motor. What'll happen quite often is from the vibration, especially with blowback guns, will cause these power cords to come off of the motor and they're not making connection to the motor, and obviously it's not going to work. So make sure that these little leads are connected to the motor in such a way that the motor is getting power from the gun. The other thing you want to make sure is that they've got a good solid connection. So once you've done that, put it back together, put the cap back on, screw it back together, and try it out again. Now, if you've gotten to this point and it's still not working, the odds are you've got something pretty major that's wrong inside of your gearbox that's going to need to be dealt with by somebody that knows something about airsoft guns. Either you got a bad switch or a burned out motor or any number of other things that could go wrong with the gun. Now, my feeling on repairing gearboxes is somewhat mixed. There's a few guys out there that spend hundreds of dollars on custom building their gearboxes, and for those guys, I guess it's okay to go ahead and just replace one component. But to me, when something breaks down inside of the gearbox, that's usually a pretty good sign that the rest of the gearbox is pretty close to wearing out. So you might go in there and replace just one part, like the trigger switch, and then the very next week, your piston might get stripped out, or a gear will get stripped, or your tappet plate will break, or something like that. So to me, for the amount of expense that it's going to cost you to go and pay me to fix it, you can just go out and buy a brand new gearbox and motor for about 50 or 60 bucks. Why not just go ahead and replace the entire component and not worry about taking one little piece out and then having something else break on you later? In our next scenario, when you pull the trigger, rather than it being dead silent, it actually makes a little bit of a sound where you can hear either a little bit of an electronic humming or you can hear a little bit of mechanical stuff going on inside of the gearbox, but it just doesn't seem to have enough power to turn the gearbox over and fire the gun. There's a couple of different possibilities that can cause that situation. Now, the most obvious solution to this is the same as the last scenario, where you want to, number one, check your battery, the connector, the fuse, and make sure everything is put together properly and charged up. Now, there are those times where the battery may have just been charged up, but it just doesn't have enough juice to turn the gun over. The reason being, as batteries get towards the end of their lifespan, they just don't hold a charge like they did when they're brand new. So as the battery starts to wear out, it's just not capable of actually supplying enough power to turn your gearbox over. Best bet is have a second battery available. It's always good to have a spare just in case you're out in the field and something happens to your first one, but get a second battery, try that out, and half the time that will fix the problem. Now, if you're still just hearing a humming sound when you pull the trigger, I would pretty much recommend that you bring the gun in for servicing at that point. I'd also pretty much recommend that you stop using the gun entirely, because if you keep pulling the trigger, what's going to happen is either you're going to, at best, burn out your fuse, or at worst, you're going to go ahead and burn out your motor, and it's going to be even more expensive to fix. So bring the gun in, let us take a look at it. Half the time it's a fairly simple fix where the piston will get compressed about 90% of the way, and it just doesn't have enough power to drive it all the way through its cycle, and we can fix that fairly cheaply. Or if it's something else, we'll be able to figure it out and get the gun back to you. In our next scenario, it's still not shooting properly, but this time it makes a more substantial noise when you pull the trigger. It sounds something like this. The other possibility is it may sound something like this. Now, there are two possibilities when a gun makes a sound like that. One is good, one is bad. On the good side, what you can do is check the bottom of your grip. There's usually a set screw that adjusts the tension on the motor. This one's got a flathead screw. This one uses an Allen screw in order to adjust the tension. What'll happen is that over a period of time when you're using your gun, the vibration will cause the motor to work itself loose, and it'll actually disengage from the gearbox inside of it. So by adjusting this set screw, this actually drives the motor closer to the gearbox and allows the teeth to mesh up and drive your gearbox. So what you're going to want to do is get a screwdriver or an Allen screw and give it a quarter of a turn, pull the trigger. If it's working properly, then you fix the problem. If you continue to tighten it up a quarter turn at a time and pull the trigger and still nothing's happening, the odds are you've got a stripped out gear. Either your piston is stripped out or the gear is stripped out, but it's not making contact and not able to drive the entire gearbox. And at that point, you want to go ahead and bring the gun in and let us take a look at it. Now, obviously, every problem that you have with airsoft guns is not going to have a simple solution like what we talked about today. But I have to say, at least half of the time when people bring in airsoft guns for repairs, the solutions are exactly the kind of scenarios that we talked about today. If you have any specific questions you'd like to go over with us, feel free to drop us a line at our email address at replayairsoft@yahoo.com, or just bring your gun on in and let us take a look at it and we'll see what we can do. So until then, we'll see you the next time.